to the New Orleans Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Humanist Perspective. My name is Jim Dugan. I'll be your host this evening. For more information about the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, please visit our website at www.nosha.org. My guest this evening is Frankie Gaynor. Frankie is a political affairs ambassador for the Borgen Project, which is a 501c3 nonprofit engaged in work regarding world hunger and poverty. Frankie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Frankie Gaynor. I am 20 years old. I go to Tulane University, double majoring in political science and communication. And I've always really been interested in international relations and helping the world's poor, and the Borgen Project has been a really great avenue for me to do that.
So tell us a little bit about this. What is the Borgen Project?
So in a nutshell, we are a global nonprofit organization that seeks to end global poverty through influencing U.S. foreign policy. That's it in a nutshell. We just have four main ways that we do that. That's through forming congressional relations, mobilizing, educating, and issue messaging, which basically just means building awareness of global issues on a scale through our online and community presence.
So when you say building awareness, whose awareness are you trying to influence?
We're trying to basically make global poverty center stage in U.S. foreign policy. Obviously, everyone knows that not everyone in the world is super rich or even knows where their next meal is coming from. So our aim is kind of to put that into the center focus, so people just get more people engaged in the U.S. and worldwide in these issues affecting other countries that we may not necessarily see every day, but are just as important.
So maybe it would be worth taking a moment to talk about some of the details of that. I think you're right, most of us are aware there's an issue of poverty and hunger in the world, but we really don't have any sense of scale or scope, how to compare our own situation to the rest of the planet.
All right, well, I have some statistics for you. There are 736 million people across the world living in extreme poverty, and half of the world's poor lives in 5 countries, those being Ethiopia, India, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Bangladesh. And other developing regions, 1 in 10 people live on less than $1.90 per day. It's really hard to kind of conceptualize that, especially when the numbers are in the millions and they're also affecting people that we may never interact with in our lives, but that doesn't make them any less important.
And I think it's hard for us to understand, too, what a number like $1.90 means. I think you have some materials on your website I saw that are about that number like that can mean different things in different countries.
Right. Well, it's hard to conceptualize what someone would do with $1.90 per day in the United States. While that would get someone further in a country that's not as wealthy as this one, it still isn't enough to get people to just a baseline standard of living. There are so many people around the world that just don't know where their next meal is coming from. And basically with the Borgen Project, our efforts are to increase this awareness and make it a focus of U.S. foreign policy to be a part of that change and to lead that effort into getting people their next meal.
So how did the Borgen Project get started?
So our founder, Clint Borgen, in 1999 was volunteering at a refugee camp in Kosovo during the genocides there. And he was just absolutely shocked at the level of poverty that he was experiencing. And so many of us today don't really know what extreme poverty looks like. And it's really hard to understand that global perspective, especially, in the United States. So with that, he graduated from the University of Washington and started the Borgen Project while working on a fishery in Alaska, and everything he made went into this fund. And so from there, one man with one laptop expanded this network. We have volunteers in 931 cities, all working to make global poverty a priority in U.S. foreign policy.
So how did you find the Borgen Project? What attracted you to it?
So I first found out about this opportunity at a College Democrats meeting at Tulane, where we were talking about internships and ways to get involved with the community and national politics and also international politics. And I was really attracted to it being a remote opportunity because as a full-time college student, I find it really hard to physically go from place to place. So I like that I can just work from my laptop in my dorm room and, email Congress, call Congress, educate, and just email people about global poverty and the things that we can do at home to make it a priority for our leaders.
So what would you describe as, say, the top 3 goals of the Borgen Project?
Definitely food security is something that's really important. There are basically 4 components of having food security, which is the physical availability of food, economic and physical access to food, food utilization, and then those 3 things being stable over time. We're also really focused on getting people access to sanitation and clean water. There are, I believe, let me get this right, 785 million people across the world drink unsafe water or have to walk over 30 minutes to get safe water. And it's just ridiculous how we take for granted our tap water and our showers, and so many people don't even have clean drinking water. So basically things like that just will uplift everyone to get them to a baseline level of food security, sanitation security, just to be able to take that next step further to thrive in a global world.
So my understanding then is that the Borgen Project has some legislative goals. This would involve both legislation that's proposed and things that are under development. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Right. Well, currently some of our bills that we're working to pass are the Keeping Girls in School Act. It actually just passed through the House of Representatives a couple weeks ago. So right now it's on the floor of the Senate. So part of our efforts right now are really trying to get people to care about this, contact their senators, and let them know that they want them to support the Keeping Girls in School Act. There's also the Global Health Security Act, which would basically at an administrative level focus our efforts on targeting people who are vulnerable to epidemics and pandemics and things of those natures. Additionally, the Global Child Thrive Act, which would increase the number of agencies that the Special Advisor on Children Adversity has, so they can have the authority to coordinate as it relates to the implementation of early childhood development policies, and also the Reach Every Mother and Child Act. As we know, women and children are among the most marginalized people in impoverished countries. And with this act, it would strengthen our government's effort to end preventable deaths of mothers, newborns, and young children in developing countries. So those are just some things that we're working on now. Just a few.
So maybe we should go back a little bit and look at some of those in just a little more depth. Keeping Girls in School Act, what does that do?
Basically, at an administrative level, it focuses U.S. foreign policy on investing in primary and secondary education for women around the world, which is really important because girls, when they are not in school, are more likely to become fall prey to child marriages and forced marriages of those nature. And by giving them the schooling and the education that they need, we can uplift them to have their own economic security and their own financial means to better take care of themselves and their family, to close that wage gap that we see all over the world.
What would this act do outside of the United States? We're talking about primarily, right? So what would this act do to make some of that happen?
Essentially, it would increase the U.S.'s effort, specifically the government, to kind of expand their outreach in terms of how we're looking at education, how we're looking at investing in these programs, and expanding that, renewing it as we see fit, and just keeping it as up to date as possible to keep up with the rest of the world.
So are we mostly talking about foreign aid funding or changing how it's funded, or requiring foreign governments to do something to get existing funds? What does that really involve?
It's more at the administrative level. So like I said before, with like the Global Child Thrive Act, that would increase the number of agencies to focus on helping children. So with the Keeping Girls in School Act, it kind of operates in a similar manner, where we better fund the agencies that already exist to keep these educational priorities a priority, and kind of just allowing that to thrive as it is.
And then Global Health Security Act is something very similar with a different focus. Why?
Right, it kind of has a similar, so we have a similar methodology in terms of using our influence as the United States as the world agenda setters to refocus it on global poverty. And a lot of aspects with that come with education, health, food, all those aspects come into allowing people to have the means that they need to uplift themselves. So with the Global Health Security Act, it would enable kind of at the administrative level more people to have access to the healthcare that they need, and kind of just improve the programs that we have, but also expand them.
And so in some of the, are you focusing globally? You mentioned 5 particular countries that are very needy. Is that where you concentrate most of your efforts?
Our efforts are completely global. While definitely less developed countries are not exactly the same, there's a lot of commonalities. So by targeting our efforts based on issues rather than on region, we can kind of make that global impact through a direct influence in specific areas, whether it's education or health, and expand that in all countries that need it.
And if the public wanted to know more about these acts or how these kinds of things can help, where would they find out about it?
On our website. So we're the borgenproject.org. And on our website, there's a lot of things that people can read up about. For example, we have our success tracker, which shows different bills that we've gotten passed so far. So for example, the PEPFAR Extension Act, which we got passed in 2018, which recognized the success of the initial PEPFAR Act passed by Bush in 2003.
We don't know what that is, by the way.
Sorry, it is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief,
Thank
relief.
you.
And that was launched in 2003 by President Bush, and that was to address the global AIDS crisis. And now, while we have medicines that will make this type of disease no longer a death threat, no longer like a threat to these people in terms of like fatality, they still don't have access to the medicines that we necessarily would have in the United States. So the PEPFAR Act initially invested more than $70 billion in prevention, testing, and treatment, and it reached millions of people around the world. So by passing the Extension Act in 2018, we were able to continue those efforts at least for another 5 years, because we recognized that they were successful in decreasing the effect that AIDS has on people.
So there must be some people somewhere in the organization that are legislative analysts, or they're monitoring what's going on with programs and that might be coming up for that might lapse, or that are under consideration. Do you know anything about the people who do those sorts of things?
Right. Well, we actually only have a handful of people who are employed by the Borgen Project. The rest of us are all volunteers.
Okay.
And with that network, we have 2 program managers, and what the program managers do is keep track of the progress of the volunteers, such as myself, and make sure that we are completing our tasks and emailing the right people about the right issues, calling the right people about the right issues, and mobilizing others within our own communities to talk more about the things that we don't see every day.
So you could tell us a little bit, maybe, if you're doing work for this project, for the Borgen Project, what does that entail? What kind of commitment are you putting out there? How much time? What kind of tasks are you doing?
Well, it's on paper a 12-hour-a-week internship, but I feel like I put in a little bit more time with that. But basically how the program works is you have your 12 weeks laid out very specifically with very specific tasks. And there are certain benchmarks that ambassadors are designed to achieve, such as fundraising a certain amount, contacting a certain number of leaders about issues every single week. That's something I do every week. And also mobilizing others in our communities to get, 1 week I'll have 10 people email Congress about an issue, and the next week it's 20. Also, something else that I'm doing is putting on a fundraiser at Dat Dog on Ferret Street, and if people mention that they are supporting the Borgen Project, 10% of what they spend will go to our funds.
So it sounds like when you become an intern for this, is that something you found through school, the internship?
I found it through the College Democrats meeting where we talked about internships and the way to get involved in our communities. And I've always really been interested in global issues, but again, like, have never really found the time or the opportunity to really get hands-on. So that's what I like about remote work, is that I can do whatever, wherever, with an internet connection.
And it sounds like they give you a pretty well-defined package of goals. They're ready.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I don't know how long the political affairs ambassadors program has been going on, but it's certainly been successful with our success tracker. Last year, 97% of U.S. senators of the U.S. Senate met with the Borgen Project. So that just shows a very tangible impact, that they know our mission, they know that we care, and they know that we're going to keep pushing until we get these bills passed.
Mm-hmm. So the Borgen Project then has some name recognition among congressional representatives.
I would like to think so.
You're personally in charge of some of that, right? So you have to try to make that happen.
I wouldn't really say in charge of anything. I think kind of just what I've been hoping to get out of this opportunity is to learn more skills about mobilizing, which is something that's really important, because what a lot of people don't recognize is actually how accessible our leaders can be. So for example, you send them a tweet, while that senator or congressperson may not necessarily see it, a member of their staff does, whether it's their communications person or their social media person, and then they mark it down. And the more people you have tweeting about an issue, or the more people you have emailing about a specific thing, the more times that gets logged in the congressperson's agenda. And that's how we bring these issues to the floor, just by having, we call them swarms, when we get a lot of people to mobilize about the same issue, and that's kind of how that's our methods. And
times have changed. I know back in the day, I'm just a little bit older than you, when I did some political activism, they always used to say, handwrite the letter. If you can't handwrite the letter, type the letter and sign it. But emails and things like that were, they actually told you not to do, but that has changed.
Yeah, for sure. So what I love about the Borgen Project is that we make it really easy for people to contact their congressional leaders. We have a contact page on our website, and all people need to do is fill in their name and address, and we automatically pull up who their representatives are. We have a pre-written letter. All they do is add their name, and that letter gets sent to the office. And then that staff member in the representative or senator's office will make a check mark that someone emailed about the Global Child Thrive Act, and that's kind of how we build awareness, and we make ending global poverty a priority in U.S. foreign policy.
So now I think that's an important feature of the Borgen Project's services and website, is that someone who wants to help in a way can choose an issue, choose an act, and then it makes it very easy for them to contact the representative.
Right. That's definitely one of our key ways, is making these letters, sending them as easy as retweeting something, but it definitely makes more of an impact when you have very, very specific language with exactly why these acts are important and exactly what they'll do to help people.
So maybe if we step back a little bit, I know some of the figures that you were looking at were things like, how much would it cost to end world hunger?
Well, according to a 2015 report from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, it would cost an additional $265 billion a year. While that sounds like an immense number, I have some other numbers for you. In 2018, the U.S. defense budget was $668 billion. And the Lockheed Martin F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program cost $1.5 trillion. So we have the money, especially as one of the, if not the richest country in the world, we have the money that would be able to make these really huge tangible impacts, but they're just not being allocated as efficiently as possible. Something that we like to say at the Borgen Project is books weigh more than bombs. So by investing at more of the civilian level rather at the military level, that's how we make those impacts in everyday civilian lives.
And of course, not every penny of those dollars has to come from the United States either. There's a whole world to draw on.
Right, yeah. Well, the United States is definitely not doing its part in ending global poverty as set by the UN Millennium Development Goals from 2000. So we were supposed to be on track to have 0.7% of our GDP donated in foreign aid, and we are bordering right now around the 0.2% mark. So while we are contributing the most amount of aid in terms of dollars, definitely not in terms of percentage of our GDP or of our economic capacity.
So how did that get developed? That's the United Nations.
Right.
Is that some, are other countries donating, reaching the goal that's been set?
I believe Denmark and Switzerland are beating us. I think they're the closest to 0.7%, if not more than that. But definitely we're slacking in our donations, I can say that. But it is actually kind of crazy because you ask the average American how much of our federal budget goes to foreign aid, people will guess it's around 25%. In actuality, it's less than 1%.
I think that is a common misconception, right? Is that we tend to perceive foreign aid is always a big issue politically, and so we tend to assume that since it's something we hear a lot in the rhetoric, that it's actually a really big part of the U.S. budget, and it's probably
really
not really, at least not for aid of this type. And so, what else can people do if they want to help out with the Borgen project? What are the different kinds? Obviously, they can give you money, but there's other things they can do.
Right. Well, mobilizing is definitely one of our key ways of influencing U.S. foreign policy, and mobilizing in a nutshell is getting as many people as possible to contact their representatives and let them know why they care about a certain issue. Another way would be through obviously donating, which would just aid our efforts in making that impact to our leaders. And also education, just simply learning about the issues, learning about what the U.S. is doing compared to other countries in terms of foreign aid and helping other places, and kind of making global poverty a front page news story again is something that's really important, because we've been hearing for years and years and years, probably decades before I was born, about how, feed the hungry, donate to the poor, but no one really knows exactly what that means or how big the problem is and on what scale it can be done.
I think there is a lot of, I think awareness is mixed, right? So some people are going to know a lot more about it. I've worked in Guatemala myself. I've seen, that's a country that in its rural areas has some really serious problems with, especially food security for younger people, and working on things like, I don't know exactly what the Child Thrive Act would do, but it sounds like something that would be related to that it's making sure that children have the basic necessities.
Right, and specifically focusing on children is really important, because that's how we uplift the next generation. Something else that we talk about on our website, and a lot of times people overlook, that global poverty is actually a national security issue. Nearly every post 9/11 Secretary of Defense has advocated to Congress to better fund the international affairs budget. We can't win national security challenges just by using military force. That stability comes from getting every citizen to a baseline level standard of living, and not simply by providing military assistance.
So can you say a little bit more about how hunger in other parts of the world is a security issue for the United States?
Well, the top 5 countries that are deemed the most dangerous by the United States, not necessarily in any particular order, are Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Nigeria, and Syria. And another thing that those countries have in common is that they're also one of the most impoverished. Poverty does not necessarily cause terrorism and national security issues, but definitely uplifting people to the point where they're not desperate for food and water would mitigate the need for them to feel like they need to engage in things that they necessarily wouldn't if they had the resources that they need. It's important to distinguish that poverty does not cause terrorism, and neither does disenfranchisement necessarily, but it is unmistakable that certain circumstances do contribute to it. Poverty, hunger, not knowing where your next meal is coming from. And children being targeted by people that want to cause harm, and they'll use these kids and kind of not brainwash them necessarily, but use propaganda to kind of show them how, if you fight with us on this issue, then we'll give you food here. Like they shouldn't need to rely on an external source. They should be able to have the means to achieve that themselves.
So it's important that we all realize that we all have a vested interest in stability, and in part that comes from people being able to eat and have clean drinking water and basic necessities like that.
Yeah, the world will be a much safer place when there's enough food to go around. Children will grow up in more stable homes without needing to worry where their next meal is coming from. And development is a lot more cost effective than sending military troops in.
So are you working with, you mentioned some technology issues, and certainly that has a lot to do with your outreach and mobilization efforts. Do some of these bills or some of the efforts of the organization involve technologies with things like treating water, making water available, distributing food, and that sort of thing?
Well, part of the international affairs budget goes to developing life-saving technologies. So some of them that have been invented recently are the life straw, for example, which basically turns unsafe drinking water into safe drinking water by filtering it. There's also, I want to get the name right, I think it's called the plumpy nut, and it's basically a really high caloric food that can help a malnourished toddler or child become nourished in a matter of weeks. There's also the kite patch, which protects humans from mosquitoes for up to 48 hours, and certainly malaria is a really big issue in a lot of other countries in terms of getting treatment to it, the right prevention. Also, solar-powered irrigation is really helpful because agriculture is a really important industry that when it's developed, it can lead to developing other sectors of the economy, and having people being able to provide their own food for themselves can eventually lead to growing their economy and their financial means even more.
So how do governments and non-governmental organizations like the Borgen Project cooperate to bring some of those technologies to places where they're needed?
Definitely through recognizing a need for where they're needed the most and using the resources available in those countries, and also using the resources available in our country, and kind of finding the best way to bring those two together to bring the most support possible.
And these are the major issues, and where do you see this in the future? Do you see these same basic issues staying on the plate? Is there a change in direction happening? Or how do you see things changing in the foreseeable future?
We've all definitely seen things changing when it comes to internet access. So we have getting one laptop per child is it's a program, and it's also a computer designed for children in countries that don't necessarily have the best internet access, and that helps with the education efforts, which would then help with our economic efforts and our financial agenda, which is to allow people to have that baseline security that they need to know where their next meal is coming from.
I think we have only a few seconds left. So Frankie Gaynor, I would like to thank you for spending some time with us this evening and for talking with us about the Borgen Project. And that is borgenproject.org, and people can find information there about that project and how to contact their representatives and what the acts and legislation might be, and links to technologies. And what else should we say about it?
If anyone is just interested in getting educated on these issues, or have even the 5 minutes of your day to send a letter to Congress or to call Congress and tell them why you support certain efforts, it's really as simple as retweeting. All you have to do is fill in your address, and boom, you've sent a letter to Congress and you've let them know what your priorities are as a constituent.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us.
That wasn't that bad. Went by really quickly.